They say blood is thicker than water. But no one warns you what happens when that same blood looks you in the eyes, smiles at you, and quietly destroys your life. This is not a story about strangers. This is a story about family. And how the people meant to protect me became the reason I almost lost everything. Tales by Lymarh. Please like, share and subscribe. My name is Daniel Harper, and for most of my life, I believed I was lucky. Lucky to be born into a family that looked perfect from the outside. Lucky to have parents who smiled in public, siblings who laughed loudly at gatherings, and a home that felt warm, at least at first glance. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. The kind of family people admired quietly. The kind neighbors pointed to and said, "That's a good home." I believed that too. Growing up, my parents taught us unity. Family first, my father always said. No matter what happens outside, this house must be your safe place. And I believed him with my whole heart. My mother was calm, soft-spoken, deeply respected. My older brother, Michael, was confident and charming, the type everyone trusted without question. My younger sister, Rachel, was sensitive, observant, always watching, always listening. And then there was me, the one who tried to keep peace, the one who believed love fixed everything. For years, nothing seemed wrong. But looking back now, I understand something painful. The most dangerous storms don't announce themselves. They start quietly. Inside the walls you trust the most. The first crack appeared the year my life began to change. I had just landed a major opportunity, one that could finally shift my future. A business partnership, legal, clean, and hard-earned. It wasn't overnight success, but it was promising. I was proud of myself. So proud, that I made my first mistake. I told my family everything. At dinner that night, I shared the news with excitement in my voice. My father nodded approvingly. My mother smiled softly. Rachel clapped her hands. Michael leaned back in his chair and smiled wider than everyone else. Too wide. Family wins together, he said, raising his glass. I smiled back, unaware that those words would later echo in my nightmares. That night, I slept peacefully. I didn't know I had just handed my dreams to the very people who would one day turn them into weapons. Betrayal rarely comes loudly. It whispers first. At first, it was small things. Private conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Sudden interest in my finances. Questions disguised as concern. How much are you investing again? Are you sure you can handle all that responsibility? You know family should be involved, right? I brushed it off. This is family, I told myself. They just care. Michael began offering advice, unsolicited, constant, confident. He spoke as if he understood my work better than I did. Trust me, he'd say. I'm just looking out for you. My parents slowly began echoing his opinions. If Michael thinks this is risky, maybe you should slow down. You don't want pride to ruin you. Pride. That word began to follow me everywhere. Rachel grew quieter. She'd look at me like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Whenever I asked if she was okay, she'd force a smile. Everything felt off. But nothing felt dangerous. Until the day I realized decisions about my life were being discussed without me present. I overheard it by accident. Michael's voice. My father's response. The door half closed. He doesn't need to know everything yet, Michael said calmly. Let's guide him, my father replied. For his own good. My chest tightened. Guide me, where? That was the first time fear knocked softly on my heart. But I ignored it. Because when family becomes your enemy, the truth is the last thing you want to believe. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It happened on a normal day. A day that started like any other. I received a call that morning, short, cold, professional. "There are discrepancies connected to your business records," the voice said. "We need you to come in." My hands shook as I drove. Discrepancies? That word didn't make sense. By the end of that meeting, my world had tilted. Documents I had never signed. Decisions I had never approved. Transactions I had never authorized. Someone had been operating through me. My name. My identity. My reputation. I drove straight home, heart racing, mind spinning. Michael was already there. Calm. Relaxed. Waiting. Before I could speak, he looked at me and said something that changed how I see family forever. "You should have listened to us." That was the moment I understood. The smiles. The advice. The concern. It wasn't protection. It was control. And the people I trusted most had been slowly pulling the ground from beneath my feet. I stood there, surrounded by familiar faces that suddenly felt like strangers. And for the first time in my life, a terrifying thought formed clearly in my mind. What if the enemy was never outside my home, but sitting right in front of me? That night, I barely slept. Not because of fear alone, but because my mind refused to accept what my heart already knew. The house I grew up in suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every sound echoed louder. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Michael's words again and again. "You should have listened to us." Not "we're sorry." Not "this is a misunderstanding." But "you should have listened." That sentence confirmed everything without saying anything at all. The next morning, I woke up early and sat quietly in the living room. The sunlight came in gently through the curtains, the same way it had for years. But nothing felt gentle anymore. My mother walked in first. She smiled, slow, careful, practiced. "Daniel, you look tired," she said softly. I searched her face, hoping to find guilt. Regret. Something human. But all I saw was calm. "I had a rough night," I replied. She nodded. "These things happen. Sometimes life humbles us." Life. Not we. Not family. Not mistakes. Just life. My father joined us moments later, newspaper in hand, acting like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. "We need to be careful moving forward," he said without looking at me. "Your actions affect all of us." That was when I realized something chilling. They had already rewritten the story. In their version, I was reckless. I was stubborn. I was the problem. Michael joined us last, confident as ever. "We'll handle this," he said. "But you need to trust us now." Trust. The same trust they had used to walk into my life and rearrange it behind my back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to ask why. But when betrayal comes from blood, confrontation feels like tearing your own skin. So I stayed quiet. And in my silence, they mistook restraint for surrender. The truth has a way of surfacing when pressure increases. As the investigation around my business grew, tension inside the house thickened. Conversations became sharper. Smiles disappeared faster. And patience ran out. One evening, I overheard Michael on the phone. His voice was low, urgent. "No, it's fine," he said. "He won't talk. He's too scared." My chest tightened. Too scared. I walked into the room without announcing myself. Michael froze. Our eyes locked. For the first time, his confidence cracked. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second too long. "Business," he replied. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally broke. You mean my business? I said calmly. The room went quiet. My parents appeared, drawn by the tension. What's going on? My father asked. I took a deep breath. No more advice. No more guiding. I want the truth. Michael scoffed. You're being dramatic. But his eyes betrayed him. Rachel entered last, standing near the doorway. She looked pale. Nervous. Tell him, she whispered suddenly. Everyone turned to her. My heart skipped. Tell him what? My mother asked sharply. Rachel's hands trembled. You said he deserved to know, eventually. Silence crashed into the room like thunder. Michael's face hardened. Rachel, stop, he warned. But once truth tastes air, it refuses to go back in. They used your name, Rachel said, looking at me now. Tears filled her eyes. They said it was temporary. That it would help the family. Help the family. My knees felt weak. Michael stepped forward. You don't understand how the world works, Daniel. Opportunities don't wait. You had access, we used it. Used. Not borrowed. Not asked. Used. And if I go down? I asked quietly. Michael shrugged. Sacrifices have to be made. That was it. The moment I understood that to them, I wasn't a son or a brother. I was a tool. That night, I packed a small bag. Not because I had a plan. But because staying felt like suffocating. Rachel stood outside my room as I zipped my bag. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried to warn you. I nodded. I know. She grabbed my hand. They'll blame you for everything. I met her eyes. They already have. Walking out of that house felt heavier than any failure I had ever faced. Because success can be rebuilt. Money can be recovered. Reputation can be repaired. But discovering that your own family is capable of destroying you? That changes you forever. I stepped into the night air and breathed deeply. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt lighter, even though my future felt uncertain. I didn't know how I would clear my name. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. I didn't know how long the road ahead would be. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. If I stayed, I would lose myself completely. Sometimes, survival means walking away from the people who taught you how to walk. And as I disappeared into the darkness, one thought burned stronger than fear. Alone, but finally awake. The first night away from my family's house was the longest night of my life. I slept in my car. Not because I had nowhere to go, but because my mind was too heavy to step into anyone else's space. I parked under a quiet streetlight, leaned my head back, and stared at the ceiling of a future that suddenly felt empty. Silence can be loud when you're grieving something that isn't dead, but broken. I wasn't just mourning my home. I was mourning the idea of family. By morning, reality arrived without mercy. Calls. Emails. Messages. The investigation had deepened. Accounts were frozen. My name was being questioned. People I once shook hands with now spoke in careful tones, choosing words like knives wrapped in velvet. I realized something painful. My family had already prepared for this. They knew where the cracks were. They knew what would fall on me. And they had stepped aside to let it happen. I checked my phone again. A message from my mother. Come home. Let's handle this properly. Properly. I almost laughed. Home was no longer a place. It was a trap. I turned my phone off. That was the first boundary I had ever set against my own blood. And it terrified me. I knew silence would destroy me faster than lies. So I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I spoke up. I contacted a legal advisor, not to accuse, but to protect myself. Every conversation felt like peeling skin. Saying my brother's name out loud in that context made my stomach twist. Still, truth demanded courage. Piece by piece, I began documenting everything. Messages. Emails. Timelines. Moments I had ignored. Patterns emerged. Michael hadn't just crossed a line, he had planned around my trust. Slowly. Carefully. Patiently. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. When my parents realized I wasn't returning home, the tone changed. My father called. "You're embarrassing the family," he said coldly. "I'm trying to survive," I replied. There was a pause. Then he said something I will never forget. "Sometimes one person has to carry the burden so the rest can move forward." I ended the call. That was the moment I stopped hoping for understanding. Rachel reached out secretly that night. "They're angry," she whispered over the phone. "They're scared." "Of what?" I asked. "Of losing control," she replied. Her words gave me strength. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood the truth. This wasn't about money. It was about power. And power hates exposure. Weeks passed. The pressure didn't disappear, but I changed. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already chosen a narrative. I focused on clarity, patience, and steady steps forward. Some doors closed. Others opened quietly. A former colleague reached out. An old mentor believed me. Strangers listened without judgment. I learned something powerful during that season. Family betrayal can isolate you, but it can also introduce you to your true support system. One evening, I received a message from Michael. Just 3 words. "We can talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not because I hated him, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop negotiating my worth. I wasn't healed. I wasn't free yet. But I was no longer blind. And that made me dangerous in a way they never expected. As I stood by my apartment window that night, my first place entirely my own, I felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not anger. Not fear. Resolve. Because when blood turns enemy, survival requires more than courage. It requires rebirth. And mine had just begun. What survived the fire? Time has a way of revealing what people try to hide. Not all at once. Not loudly. But steadily, like water wearing down. Stone. Months passed after I stopped responding to my family. I focused on rebuilding, slowly, carefully, honestly. Every day felt like walking on broken glass, but I kept moving because standing still felt worse. The investigation reached its peak quietly. No dramatic arrests. No shouting matches. Just facts laid bare. Records matched. Timelines aligned. Patterns exposed. And finally, the truth stood on its own, without me having to scream it. The consequences arrived the way consequences always do, without emotion. Michael lost everything he thought made him powerful. The connections vanished. The confidence drained from his voice when he was asked questions he could no longer dodge. My parents faced something even heavier. Silence. The kind of silence that follows denial when there's nothing left to deny. Rachel was the only one who came to see me. She stood at my door, older somehow, smaller too. "They're asking about you," she said. I nodded. I figured. "Do you want to see them?" I looked past her, out the window, at the life I had fought to reclaim. "No," I said softly. "Not yet. Because healing doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like distance. For a long time, I believed forgiveness meant reopening doors. But I learned something deeper. Forgiveness can happen without access. Closure can happen without conversation. And peace can exist without reconciliation. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights flickered on, I sat alone in my apartment, quiet, safe, mine. I thought about the boy who once believed family meant protection. I thought about the man who learned family can also mean pain. And I thought about who I had become because of both truths. I didn't hate them. Hate would have chained me to the past. Instead, I released them, without approval, without applause, without permission. Because the greatest victory was not proving them wrong. It was surviving what they did and still choosing integrity. Still choosing growth. Still choosing myself. Blood may have turned enemy. But it did not turn me into one. And that is how I won. 1. Being related does not mean being safe. 2. Love without boundaries can become a weapon. 3. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, without explaining yourself. 4. Your healing is more important than keeping peace with people who destroy it. Family should protect your future, not steal it. If this story touched you, remember this. You are not weak for trusting. You are not wrong for loving deeply. And you are not broken for choosing yourself. Some lessons come wrapped in pain, but they shape unbreakable strength. Thank you for watching Tales by Lymarh, where real emotions meet real stories. Until next time. Guard your heart, honor your truth, and never ignore the quiet warnings. Because not every enemy wears a stranger's face.